This is like walking in the Rockies. Everybody can do this. 10 days and 265 kilometers later, I said to Mrs. One hell of a walk. We weren't even halfway there. So it was an incredible experience. I want to go back and talk a bit about what the Camino means and just give you some background ideas. It is, of course, a pilgrimage route. So Buen Camino is a pilgrimage greeting that's given to one person to the other as you walk. And it's very important, I think, to know that the Camino is not just another trail. It's not just like saying, have a good trip. It's actually wishing you something very deep and profound. Because essentially the Camino is a pathway. But I take the word path out and say it is the way. So it's the work that you do as a human being to make sure that your values and your actions are aligned. It's the work you do to show love and kindness. It's all those kinds of things that constitute the way. So each one of us, as we walk and live and breathe our lives, we mold and set a pattern, and people begin to know us for that. And so that is the way, which is a very precious, precious concept. Because it's a way of knowing the person's integrity, it's a way of knowing about their spirituality. And essentially the way is about your identity. You know, you may walk for many, many, many miles, many kilometers, not thinking about this, but in truth that is what it is. It's your identity that's being formed. So it's a very powerful and deep concept. And it is, as I said, about alignment. So what you gain from just the walking and being there and with these parameters creates a bond between you and a sense of kinship with others, and the recognizing that what you have in common is the walk of the Camino. Someone said to me, I only did a week's walk, you know. And what Jose Carlos, Nicole's husband, said to me before I left, he said, don't worry about your destination, Pat. He said, whatever you walk will be what you need to walk. That's your Camino. And you must be proud of it, regardless of how long it is or how this other aspect goes. So we know that's the meaning of the word then. And when you say Buen Camino, as people always greet each other, that creates a bond, I believe, and a sense of kinship. You know, the Chinese say there's a thin red thread that is wound through all of us so that we're all connected in some way. And that's what Buen Camino does when people speak to you on the path. The other thing that is remarkable about it, and I think should be said, is that it is an ancient pathway. It is truly one of the oldest pathways in the world. It was 100,000 years ago that the remains of the first inhabitation of Europe were found. And those were right on the Camino. So for 100,000 years, approximately, because you know we don't have accurate statistics, for 100,000 years people have lived along by that pathway. So it's been inhabited, it's been part of it. It's part of humanity and our understanding of the Camino. And so there is that. And then as you look at the chronology, sorry, I just lost my train of thought there. Imagine doing that. I'm not even on the Camino, I don't have a good reason. But when you look at the chronology then of this incredibly ancient and very beautiful landscape, in 100,000 BC we know that was the first remains of habitation. And then in 4,000 BC the megalithic people lived there. And they created things like, you know, the Stonehenge, the huge Stonehenge in England, the massive monolithic rocks. They did the same thing in Galicia, which is the furthest west province of Spain. They created those monolithic structures. Some of them were funeral places, others were just they stand up all on the horizon as you're walking. So you see them and you see the results of their work. And then about in the year 1000, so that's 100, and then 4, and then 1,000 years BC, the Celtic people came. And for those of you with a Celtic background, as I have, you know, this is always really interesting. The Celts were very involved in the spirituality of the Camino. And they would worship the sun, as on the solstice, the sun would sink down into the ocean and mysteriously disappear and then reappear in the east. And that was one of their sacred rites for the solstice. They also had rituals around death and around dying, and a great sense of belief in those aspects. And then 200 BC, still before Christ, 200 BC, the Romans came. And they did the Roman thing, you know, they built beautiful bridges, they built highways, they left those, and they're still there, and we can walk them today as well. the interesting thing I think about this is that all of these pathways and the evidence of them, and as you walk through that landscape, you see evidence continuously about the length of time the Camino's been there, and you get a sense of the humanity of the people that were walking and that you're now following. It's happened again. You know, they say this is a matter of age. And then, of course, about 40 AD, St. James, or Saint Jacques as he was called, began to proselytize in that part of Spain. And the Camino started to become very much of a religious place. So it became one of 3 places that were visited. You could either visit the Camino on your pilgrimage, you could go to Rome, or you could go to the Holy Land. And these were very important aspects. And the Catholic Church took over the Camino basically and used it as a pilgrimage route, and went from, people started to go all the way to Santiago, and there were the usual difficulties, of course, that always happen in European history, and I won't linger on those, but just to say to you again that you're never far away from the influence of other people. From the moment you put your foot on the first step, you're part of that scene. You're one of the people that's walked the Camino, and you're part of the legacy that is given to other people. Then I'd like to tell you a bit about my book, after we think a bit about this ancient pilgrimage. So this is a story, I guess, of my adventure of walking 800 kilometers. And it's at the same time, you can't actually walk 800 kilometers without being changed and transformed by it. So there is the outer act of walking, and then there's the inner act of change in the very core of our being. And it all started one night here in Calgary, and I was visiting Wendy, and she said to me, "What do you think, Pat? Would you like to go on the Camino?" And I said, "Yeah, I'd love to do that. Where is it?" That's why I show people where it is. And so we began to look seriously at doing this Camino, and her husband was also interested, so there were the 3 of us. And we started to practice. We started carrying packs, we started doing all sorts of long hikes, and we did that. Oh, thank you. Oh, are you having trouble hearing? Yes. Oh, is this better? Yes. Would you like me to tell you about the ancient countryside? That's why you're not laughing at my jokes. Yeah. Anyway, so we agreed, and the 3 of us said this is what we're going to do. And I knew at the time that it was an adventure for me. I found it really exciting to walk 800 kilometers. I thought I'd like to do that. And it didn't have any sense at that particular time of a calling. And you know what a calling is. It's that irresistible feeling that you must look after yourself. You must look after your values and realign them in setting up your life properly. It's a bit like the Buen Camino idea. So I didn't have anything like that. I was just looking at the adventure, and I love walking, and so that was a chance to do it. And as we talked, we sort of made some vows. We promised each other certain things. And the first vow was that we would walk, and we would not take transportation. Regardless of the reasons, we were going to walk the entire Camino, the 810 kilometers we said at that point. People say it's 790 or 800 or 810. We chose 810 for the obvious reason. And the second thing we decided we would be self-sufficient. We would carry everything we needed in our backpack. And you know, for me as a woman who loves jewelry and stuff like that, it's not a matter of what you need, it's what you want, or what you want and what you need. It gets very difficult to manage. But because we had a limit of how much we could actually carry, and I thought my limit was likely 10 to 12 kilos, it became very important. So I weighed every t-shirt I had. I didn't take 3 t-shirts, believe it or not. I took only 2, because one could dry while I was wearing the other one. I weighed everything of toothpaste, bought the smallest toothpaste. I went through amazing problems with getting things weighed and keeping them under 10 to 12 kilos. Then one day, as I was looking at these really dull clothes, I thought, I wonder if I could just do something a little bit different. So I took 4 spectacular pairs of earrings, put them on the scale, and guess what? Isn't it marvelous? They weigh nothing. So I took them all with me. We agreed, as well as our backpack, where we would carry everything, was that we would take no guided tours. We wouldn't take tours. We would do all this work ourselves. We would read about it. We'd talk to other people, we'd gauge all the knowledge we could, but we would make it our Camino in that sense as well. And we promised that we'd never make reservations in advance. We weren't going to reserve for a week. So we knew that we would walk about 25 kilometers a day. And that was sort of likely what we came out to, because Mac was an amazing man who did scope and sequence on everything. So we always knew where we were going to be, and that was a great comfort at times. But we said, no reservations on a long-term basis. We will reserve each day for the day. And we did do that. Then they got to something which was very contentious, and that was hostels. Now, the true Camino experience is you stay in a hostel with double bunk beds. And I don't know the last time you folks stayed in a double bunk bed, but I was not going to do it. And Wendy said to me, well, of course, you know, you with your middle-class hang-ups, this is where your problem is. And I said, you can call it whatever you like. But when I was hitchhiking at age 22 and I stayed in those hostels, I promised myself I wouldn't do this again. So it's a serious consideration. So there was that. And then there was the second thing. We talked about pace, because pace is absolutely critical when you're walking with people. And we all have our own pace and our own way of going about things. And I am not a fast walker. I've always been a slow walker. I'm generally the very last person in the group. I love walking, but I'm not a fast walker. So I said this to them. They said, oh, you know, Pat, don't worry. These people are long and tall and elegant, you know. They said, don't worry about it. And I looked at them and I could just see them loping along like antelope down the trail, and I'll be trudging along at the back. And I said, no, and you mustn't worry about this. It's definitely true that I'll be the slowest and the last person. So that was left sort of in that never zone, I guess. We arrived and we got our credential, and which was a sort of passport which you get stamped every night in the Caminos to prove that you've done that section of walking. So we got those things, and it was raining in that day in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port. Raining fairly heavily. So we decided we'd go back to our hotel, and at the hotel we would have our first hotel picnic. So we went and bought the things we needed. And that included some cheese, and some bread, and 2 bottles of wine. Wendy said, I think it's a lot of wine, if we'll ever finish that. And we went thump, because the first bottle came out. And you know, it wasn't really that bad. There's 2 bottles of wine in it. So let me just go back and read you a bit of the text at this point. This is our first hotel picnic, Wendy commented. There's no way, though, that we'll ever drink that much. As I said, the cork came out of the bottle with a thump. So, said Wendy, sitting on the bed, let's review our goals. That's what the book suggests we focus on first. The bed sagged as Mac leaned back against the pillows. Wendy sat on his right. I perched on a chair near the bed. I just want to walk that far, Mac said. I wonder if I can make it. I wonder how it'll go. No problem, I assured him. It's really simple. First your left foot, and then slightly ahead of that you put your right foot, and then the left. Wendy and I grinned at him. It's easy for you to make fun, Mac said. You just wait. Well, I want to explore the Camino as a metaphor, said Wendy. I think that's what it's all about, a metaphor for living. Isn't it just straight living? After all, we're living and doing it, not just reflecting on it, I challenged. No, she insisted. I see it from my point of view as a student of literature. Metaphors are important in understanding life. The Camino, walking this long voyage, is a metaphor for life, and it'll guide my thinking. She pursed her lips and made a note in her journal. Your turn, Pat. I have 3 goals, I said. To speak Spanish again, to see part of Spain I've never been to, and to visit the cathedrals in Burgos and Leon, which I read are real marvels of architecture. As I stated my goals, I could hear the confidence in my voice. I really believed in them. Is that all? Mac looked disappointed. I thought you, of all people, would have something else to say. Well, I can feel there might be something else, but I don't think I'll know what that is till I finished. I started to stammer. Wendy interrupted. Surely you're not going to be that vague. Just think of all the projects you've planned. These goals you're talking about are not strategic. They don't give direction. There's no bigger picture. You can tell we're in education. Well, I sense there are parts of my life that I'm not claiming as my own, I said, and that I'm not fully resident in. I looked down at my wine. I felt my cheeks flush, and there was a silence. I twirled my glass, stuck for words. Wendy came over to me and filled my glass. That's just psychobabble, she said. What are you trying to say? I looked at her and tried to explain. Well, to use a metaphor, Wendy, imagine that your life is like a big, beautiful house. And you've taken up residence in the house, but there's some rooms you've never seen and you've never entered. Those rooms, or realities if you like, are accessible, should you ever have the courage and imagination to open the door and live in them. Wendy ignored my comments. Why don't we talk about the possibility of spirituality in the Camino? Everyone says the experience is spiritual. I tasted the strong dark wine as it ran down my throat. The pungent smell of cheese filled the room. A sudden wind blew the shutters closed. I heard the drops of rain on the roof. In my imagination, the lights of the town and the distant sounds of people invaded our space. I wanted to walk away, leave this conversation, just be somewhere else. This is just what we needed, I exclaimed quickly. More of the bad weather they talk about in the Pyrenees. Do you know something? It's sometimes so bad they can't even see the peaks. It's like walking the prairies. Well, I'm off. 6:30 comes soon enough. Sleep tight. I got up and stretched and closed the door behind me. And that's the first sort of little interaction between people talking about their goals. And I included this because you can see how naive they were. It was going to be a bigger picture. It was going to be strategic. It was all going to work out that way. And that's, I think, the way we often start off on things. So I'm going to just give you now another passage that happened about 2 weeks later. And we had, by that time, walked 25 kilometers on the average every day for those 2 weeks. We had seen endless numbers of people. Like it's an amazing experience to bump into people, walk with them for a while, or walk entirely on your own, as I did for a good 10 days. I saw basically people walk by me, but I didn't walk with anyone. So you have such a range of experiences that you could never have imagined and never predicted how you would react to them. So this is a conversation a bit like the goal conversation. What were the high points for you today? Asked Wendy, twirling her glass as she looked from Mac to me. What I'm loving, said Mac as he folded his hands under his chin, is the sheer pleasure of covering the kilometers at my own pace and in my own time. We're all active, and I love to walk a lot, but this is my first experience with walking as my sole means of getting around. And I can even predict with some accuracy where I'll be and how long it'll take. And I'm getting stronger too, I can feel that. Wendy continued twirling her glass, and I tilted my head back and watched the early stars appearing on the horizon. The silence lengthened. For me, she said softly, it's what I see in our fellow pilgrims and in the people we encounter on the way. And really what I see in us too. There's something special. She stopped. That's not the right word. It's more than that. It's as though we have some bigger part of us and we've caught a glimpse of it from time to time. And that bigger part of us becomes clearer as I walk. I have the feeling that walking is how our mind and our hearts are tied together. Or maybe they're embedded in our body and walking just makes it obvious. What do you think? She looked at me. Suddenly I felt connected to both of them in a depth that surprised me. We may not spend our days walking together, yet our experiences had so much in common. At the core of the walking was our connection to the Camino, in the sense of the way that I was talking about earlier. I think I share that feeling, Wendy. I heard a tentative tone in my voice. I've been thinking that the body is home for all of our experiences, our thought and our soul, if we have one. And I've asked myself if I'm thinking this way because we've been walking for days now. I had a random thought about the Bible and Moses today. Do you remember his story? He spent 40 days and 40 nights alone on the mountain. And in the end, he gained huge insights, truths that he spoke about to others. It's an interesting case in point, when Max said, I don't remember why Moses was doing time, but I'm not. So you can see the difference that happened. We became gentler with each other. We listened better. And it was, again, an amazing transformation, I guess is the only word I can think of for it. And some good amusement as well. It wasn't all just amusement and gaining new perspectives. I mean, walking 800 kilometers is hard work. And it isn't exactly easy work. And some days it's just straight painful. And this is an account of one of these days. But even in its painfulness of that particular day, and it was me that was in pain, I bumped into people and made lifelong friendships. So I'd like to share this one then is happening around the idea of what hard physical labor the walk is. Slowly but surely I walked up the ridge. My feet were hurting immensely. In the last 2 days, after about 5 hours of walking, the pain would begin. Then I took painkillers, although the pain seemed beyond control. I was on my own, trudging along slowly when I arrived. Barren landscape stretched in all directions. There was no greenery, no farmed land. A large metal cross stood immutable against the sharp sky. The scraggly trees ranged back from it as though in awe, and under the cross were folded pieces of white paper, barely visible beneath the large stones placed on them. Someone had tied a ribbon to the cross, and it lifted and floated with the random breezes from the valley. I sat on the wooden bench. Sharp, penetrating pain filled my feet as the blood flow changed. "Jesus," I exclaimed. "Jesus." I let my head roll back and rub my eyes. It'll stop soon, I thought. It's bound to. Nothing this bad can go on. Slowly the pain abated. I looked around guardedly. There was no one approaching. I searched quickly in my pack and found a piece of paper and a pen. What will I write? I wondered. What's appropriate for an agnostic to pray for? And to whom do I address this? Never mind the details, I thought. Just get it over with before somebody sees you. The words flowed without much effort. I pray for divine intervention so my feet won't hurt so much. I hesitated. Should I sign it? I reread the message in my handwriting. It was in the back of an old bank form. Then I saw two pilgrims approaching. I quickly found a rock and placed my prayer with the hundreds of others at the foot of the cross. I was sitting on the bench when the two women arrived. Hearing the cadence of their voices, I knew they were French, and my heart quickened at the thought of some company. I stood up like a welcoming committee, I thought. Moments later, two dark-haired women appeared, looking at each other and laughing. Their laughter was strong and vibrant, the laughter of good friends. "Bonjour," I said, unable to resist. I joined in the laughter. They came over to the bench and sat down. "Phew, that's a long way up, n'est-ce pas?" said one. "I'm Jeanne. We're from Toulon. Do you know it, on the Mediterranean coast?" I nodded. "And this is my friend Cathy." I introduced myself, and we sat staring at the scene before us. The wind had picked up and the clouds were skittering across the sky. "Why are you walking the Camino de Santiago?" Katie's voice broke the silence with a flourish. "Well, at this moment, I'm not too sure. My feet are killing me," I replied in French. "But to answer your question, I guess the common reasons, to see the country, the churches, practice my Spanish. How about you?" "My time on the Camino," said John, "is to pray for the soul of my sister, who died of cancer last year. She was my older sister, only 43 years old. Cathy is my closest friend, and this is now the second year she comes with me to walk for 2 weeks." "We," said Cathy, "our husbands are in Toulon. They stay there, look after the kids, and earn money so we can walk." Their laughter was conspiratorial. "How far will you walk today?" "We'll stop when we've finished," said Jeanne. She was small, vivacious, and dark. Aha, I thought, I'm right. The French don't do scope and sequence. That's what Ian had said was happening. They don't do scope, and we sat together in the bench chatting in French. I found myself staring at my boots. The pain was still there. "My feet are killing me," I confided again. They both grinned at me. Ours too. I felt the empathy between us, and before I could stop myself, I said, "Would you mind if I walk with you for an hour? I'm not a fast walker, but I really could use some company. And of course, if you don't want to..." "Don't be silly," interrupted Jan. "Of course we'll walk together to Los Arcos." "That's wonderful," I said, my eyes floating behind my dark glasses. "That's where I'm meeting the other Canadians I'm with." The pain settled in my feet and moved up to my knees as we began going down the rocky slope together. And then it continues from that, talking about it. The pain never stopped, by the way. It was amazing to me that it could be that bad. And yet, when we formed that friendship and the talks and the laughter that we had as we walked along, the pain was secondary. It was really irrelevant. And it was a great thing to have experienced. I said to Jeanne, I was praying for a divine intervention so my feet wouldn't hurt so much. And she said, "There's always somebody who answers our prayer." Again, just a beautiful moment. I've got these things all tied down. Yes. How is the reading going for you? Is this of interest?
Yes.
Okay, then I will. This next part I want to read about is about pace, because that is, I guess it's the essence of our identity. You walk the pace you walk for whatever reasons you do. And when I would try to walk faster, my knees would start to ache, and it was impossible. If I started thinking about things in the past and I found myself turning back to the past, again I would find myself stopped by the roadside for no apparent reason. So I began to realize that the pace and who I was so interconnected that if I thought that way, I walked that way. And that's an interesting observation to make. So this is again about the idea of pace. So although the first part of the trail was a gradual climb, it soon changed and became a series of switchbacks. I was panting, I could feel a trickle of sweat down my back. I looked for Wendy and Mac, but they had disappeared. We had talked about this in Calgary and agreed on how we'd manage our different paces. Like all the hikers we knew, we respected the idea of pace. None of us was willing to change, and we also knew and accepted that I'd often walk on my own. Yet on this first morning of the walk, the logic of all that definition escaped me. I focused on my body and how it was responding to the challenge as the path steepened and the footing became more problematic. My muscles seemed clumsy and ill-coordinated. My experience had taught me, though, that this was the first stage of finding my pace and my rhythm. And slowly the muscles began to work together and my body warmed with the effort of climbing. So again, just that sense of, I guess, being resident and knowing what's going on with your body. And I'd like to continue this idea of the walk. They talked. I was actually on the second day. I ran into an exhibitionist. Wasn't much to exhibit, but nevertheless it was a bit alarming. And it had caused me a certain amount of discomfort, and I didn't like being alone. And so this is the reference. How was your day? I asked. They looked briefly at each other. Oh, it was fine, but we've been here for an hour. Do you have any idea how we worry about you? I'm sure everybody thinks that you're wonders why you're walking alone, said Wendy. Her eyes flashed and her jaw set and her teeth clenched. Well, I said, don't worry. Worrying's a futile activity. If there's anything wrong. And Mac interrupted me. But you might have met another pervert, and how would we know? And look what happened. You were so alone and it happened so suddenly. Well, I began, that's how it is for me. I'm sometimes alone, not always because I walk slowly, but also because, this time Wendy interrupted, I'm sure everyone thinks we're terrible not waiting for you. It's just that, well, we walk faster than you do. It's okay, Wendy. I sat my glass down a little harder than I realized. The beer sloshed on the table. We've already talked about pace. We talked about it in Calgary. We've talked about it here. We all agree. We stick to our pace. When the conversation with the Swiss came back to my mind, if anyone asks why I'm walking alone, I just tell them we have different paces, and they accept that. Look, the most important thing is we've agreed on how to handle it, so it's not a problem. Mac looked at me solemnly. Wendy whirled her wine glass on the wet table. I sipped my beer, which tasted wonderful, so cool, so wonderfully sharp and wet. And that's just again about the fact that this issue of pace kept coming back.